Welcome to Mountainside Tabletop. Today we want to talk about how much we love Warcry and why it's a game that you should probably consider trying. So there's been a lot of speculation lately that Warcry's on the way out. And first of all, I don't really buy that.
Are you going to put a thing there? First of all, just for that one.
First of all, I don't really buy that. And second of all, even if it stops being supported and it stops being sold, there's nothing stopping you from playing Warcry. Just, there's tons of people that play Mordheim, regardless of that rule set being,
technically
gone.
unsupported.
Yeah, it's a great game. And if we weren't making videos to go out in the public, I would never read a single balanced data slate for it. It's just not that kind of game. And so losing support, even if it does, which I don't think it will, really doesn't feel like that big a deal to me.
No, not at all.
So obviously it looks like some of the old war bands aren't going to be for sale any longer.
Maybe.
Yeah, right. Maybe.
It's unclear if they're not for sale or just not supported for Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, and so don't let that discourage you. If you are into skirmish games and if you're into kind of fantasy themes and you think the models are great, which honestly they really are, it's a great time to pick it up. I think it's a really good game, and we're going to talk about why we like it.
Yeah, you could play with this on your team, or this, or even this. We're going to find out what's there in post, exactly. But there'll be some sick models there. I think the first reason why we really love Warcry, it's so easy to learn and it's so easy to teach people.
Yeah.
There are other games out there, skirmish games, big war games, whatever kind of games, even role-playing games, tons of games that it takes so long to explain the rules, and then you're explaining the rules as you go, and it's but actually this.
You know what?
It's just confusing.
That's a great point. This is easier to learn than Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, it's not even close.
Oh, crazy. I didn't even consider that.
The rules are so easy to teach. You can learn them in a half an hour or less.
Yeah.
Easily less. If you're trying to get someone that doesn't play any miniature gaming games into miniature games, this is a great game to do that with, I think. This is a perfect gateway game.
Totally.
When my kid gets old enough, this is going to be the first game that I whip out,
Yeah, for sure. So another great thing about the rule set is that you can kind of choose how competitive you want the game to be. Yeah. Because if you're not aware, all of the victory conditions and deployment and everything is kind of randomly selected through a deck of cards. By choosing which cards are available to be selected, you can make games that are just narratively wild and fun and stupid in the best sense of the word.
Yeah.
Or, you can have a tournament style balanced competitive experience.
And people do that.
Yeah, if that's what you're after.
Yeah.
Other games that we played, of course, as we're a mainly kill team channel and mainly kill team players, everything is kind of in the reference of how does it compare to kill team. Generally in my experience, if you go to a game store or whatever and you're playing a game of kill team, especially against a stranger, there's kind of this implicit understanding that you're walking into a competitive style game, right?
Unless you're playing explicitly narrative or something.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just not the case with Warcry. It fosters a totally different style of game, while still, giving that option.
You can certainly sweat, and I'm sure there are people that sweat this game, but I think it shines. I'm hesitant to use the term beer and pretzels, because I think that has a casual connotation that's this isn't a serious game. For how we play, it's not centered around who wins and who loses. It's these are our teams, we're throwing them against each other.
Yeah.
What's going to happen? So in narrative play in Warcry, yes, there's a victory condition to each game you're playing, but also your warband is on a quest. You pick a quest before you start going out on missions and playing games. And, you can lose a game and lose a victory condition. So yeah, you'll get maybe less rewards, but you might still complete some objectives for your quests that you picked. It's more layered than just, did I win or did I lose?
Yeah.
Did I kill so many people on my opponent's team that there's a very high chance one of them might permanently die or be wounded and be worse in the next battle, Or, I lost I lost a victory condition, but I completely prevented you from, performing your chaos ritual that would have got you huge upgrades. It's less binary than just did I win or did I lose. And I think that's really fun. And also, it's in this interesting middle ground between like a game like Kill Team and a game like Mordheim or Necromunda, I think, where I feel like those other games, Mordheim and Necromunda, they're focused around very customized characters. Each model on your team is like, that's Johnny Bob, and he has this specific weapon. And Kill Team is like, this is generic Mandrake Warrior, right? It's somewhere in the middle.
Totally.
And I think you can pull it in whatever direction you want to pull it to more. And, it's very flexible in that way.
Yeah, and another thing that's really great about Warcry, especially kind of talking about this element of flexibility, is the access to list building.
Yeah.
Again, comparing it to Kill Team, it's like it's a whole new universe of team creation, right? Like, first of all, the bespoke teams versus the compendium teams is not such a divide. Like, they're just as competitive, they're just as well made.
Honestly, some of the compendium teams are better.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. As evidenced by my corn team in the Frozen Wastes. And so there's access to essentially infinite combinations of teams, right? Like so if you're unaware, all of the armies in Age of Sigmar can be played in Kill Team or in Warcry to some capacity. But you also have access to allies from other war bands, monsters, like the ability to have big models on the table is fun.
Yeah, so for example, you could run a warband that is, your faction is Cities of Sigmar, but because Stormcast Eternals are in the same Grand Alliance, you could have a Stormcast Eternal hero playing on the same team as your Cities guys. Yeah. Or whatever. Goes for every Grand Alliance. Yeah,
exactly. And so, like, that makes it even more so where, like, no two games are going to be the same of Warcry. Especially because, like, okay, so you've got your list, you've got your team, and then say you pick, like, a hyper elite team with, like, five or six models, and then you pull a victory condition that is stay alive and kill more people than your opponent. That's great, but then, like, inversely, the next game you play could be control the most objectives at any one time, and then all of a sudden you're playing against someone with 15 skinks on the board. Yeah. And what's cool is, like, you can't just metagame. You can't create the ultimate powerful list. And because, like, the problem is, if you could, people would, regardless of, like, how much you may want to play, like, just a kind of friendly game. With this randomness combined with this list building and, like, there being so much flexibility and so much diversity in how the teams can look, like, you always have a good game. You walk into any matchup potentially favored or potentially disadvantaged. And, it's just how the cards fall.
Yeah. Another thing that we both really love about Warcry, the games are so fast. Yeah. The games are super fast. You can play a game probably in, like, 15 minutes, potentially. Not every game's going to be 15 minutes, but, like, games are super short. There's no, like, wading through a giant rule book to try and figure out, how does this niche interaction work? And the rules are minimalist in a way that's not boring. Yeah. And I think that is something that's really valuable because there's so many times when we play other games where your specific team has like 20 rules and you're playing and then you get to the end of the game and you're like, oh, you know what? Actually, that other guy shouldn't have died because I had the flux blast of infinite possibilities interacting with my 7 tentacles of the 19 hells of the Frozen Wastes. And then you're like, actually, but you had a guy that negated psychic power, so actually it was legit. Oh, but that was actually an illegal build because you can't have the guy that negates psychic powers. No.
Oh, but the gun had ceaseless, and I paid a CP to reroll that. That's the real Kill Team nightmare.
That just doesn't happen. Like the core rules that apply to every team are like very simple, very easy to understand, and then the amount of rules that change for each specific team. It's a very short list of rules. Yeah. And it's basically like, unless you're like looking at the rule and you're like, okay, I'm going to spend my resource to use this rule, there aren't really like very many passive rules. So it's not like you can forget that this aura was on. Yeah. Really. Almost never. There's sometimes, but really like almost never. Yeah. It's very, very hard for you to like forget that a rule was active in this game. Right. Compared to other games anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Famously, it is, and I mean, okay, I don't know if this is true. I've anecdotally heard that it's the only Games Workshop game that has like won awards for game design. And honestly, I'm not surprised to hear that, because it is a really kind of beautiful, elegant rule set that kind of plays itself.
It's like the Michelangelo of rule sets. You know?
Yeah. I'm even less qualified to talk about that.
Statue of David, that's what that's called, right?
Yep.
What's it called?
Yeah.
Yeah? Is that what it's called?
Yeah. That's what it's called.
The tiny piece. Okay, one other thing I want to talk about, we're kind of jumping around here,
Sorry.
but there are so many skirmish games where the terrain is super important. Warcry is no different. However, there are so many skirmish games that require you to have very specific kinds of terrain for the game to function properly.
Right.
Warcry is not one of those games.
Totally.
And that makes it super fun for making your own terrain, scratch building terrain, pulling terrain in from other systems, using your D&D terrain, using pots and pans, using like whatever.
Yeah.
I feel like it's just not limited. Like, for example, we play a lot of Kill Team. Well, you can't place objectives on top of terrain technically because you place the objectives first.
Right.
Right? So if you have like a big chunky piece, then maybe, it's too big, you can't really put objectives down, so you can't use that. Oh, well, you need a certain amount of this terrain, you need a certain amount of that terrain. If you have too many big pieces, it's not going to work. If you only have tiny pieces, it's not going to work. You have to have the right amount. Warcry works with no terrain. It works with a huge, compact board of terrain.
Yeah. And, obviously, we all know as Kill Team players that the line of sight rules are
obtuse.
Yeah, a complicated nightmare. I think we can all agree.
Even if you understand them and like them, you can't argue that they're good for bringing new players into the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, determining whether if this piece of terrain is hollow or if it's a solid piece of plastic impacts whether or not you can shoot someone.
So ridiculous.
Right. And it's like, okay, I understand from a game mechanics perspective why those rules exist and how they work. And now, like, 4 years into the edition, I can finally wrap my head around it or whatever. But that just doesn't really exist with Warcry. Like, line of sight and cover is all super simplified, and there's just less shooting in the game.
Yeah.
It's not like many of my teams have no ranged attacks.
I think I'd say probably like most of the teams, over 50% of team combinations have no shooting. I would guess.
Over 50% of team combinations are like dudes with swords. I guess that takes us into our next thing we want to talk about, which is like how great the models are. As someone who enjoys the hobby side, I enjoy building and painting models. Having access to everything in Age of Sigmar and a lot of things in Warhammer Underworlds, it opens up like so many different kind of themes that I otherwise wouldn't see, and they're gorgeous models. Like, they're so good. I think that the Age of Sigmar stuff is like the best stuff that Games Workshop makes.
Definitely up there.
Yeah, like it's really beautiful, and it's so much fun to do it.
We already touched on this too, but I think the idea of bringing in allies from other related factions really opens up the hobby so much, because it just allows for another layer of creativity. Like, okay, I have my Cities of Sigmar warband, and I want to ally in some Sylvaneth heroes. Well, now I'm painting maybe the cities models like they're from the Living City.
Right.
Like, they're all covered in moss, and now these models are related, and there's some continuity between my team,
Yeah, and when you're scrolling Warhammer.com on the toilet, you can check one more box for like armies to filter, and it expands your selection and doubles your time scrolling.
There is one more big reason why we think Warcry is a great game to still get into, and that's because we have Warcry videos on our channel that you can watch. We're super into it, and we're going to keep making Warcry videos. So, links in the description, no. Links in the up here, no. Just go on our channel.
Yeah.
Search Mountainside Tabletop Warcry on YouTube.
So, like, we've kind of made a concerted decision to, like, play the games we love. And regardless of whether or not it's the most popular algorithm-pleasing thing on the internet. And Warcry is going to be a big part of that. So we're going to do more of it because we really like it. And
frankly, if you're not clicking on Warcry content, you're a loser anyway.
To wrap it up, because we're getting a bit unhinged here. Yes, there is speculation that this game is going away, but first of all, that's totally unfounded. Second of all, if it is going away, doesn't matter. You can still play Warcry, and you still should. You still should. You still should. You still should. You still should.